Pahlavi text, translated by E.W. West, Part 1, Endnotes, Sacred Books of the East, Oxford University Press, 1860. In verse 4 of chapter 7, see T-star, Yast 13, 16, and 18, where it is stated that T-star assumes the form of a man for the first 10 nights, of a bull for the second 10 nights, and of a horse for the third 10 nights. Also in Bundahis 19:126, T-star is specially invoked in his form of a bull, and distinguished in brilliance, or it may be translated, he hovered in the light, as Winchman and Juste have it. In comparing the inundation produced by T-star with the Noachian deluge, it must be recollected that the former is represented as occurring before mankind had propagated on the earth. The term Faraku card, wide-formed, is a free Pahlavi translation of the Avestan Vuurukasha, wide-shored, are having wide abysses, applied to the boundless ocean. See chapter 13, verse 1. For the Avesta account of this expedition in verse 7, see T-star Yast, verse 20 to 29. And in verse 8, Apaosh, miswritten Apavas, or Apavas and Pazand, by all manuscripts in this chapter. But see the chapter 28:39. The word parasang is here used for the Avestan Hatra, which was about an English mile. See chapter 26:1. A quotation from T-star Yast, verse 25, is in verse 9. And mentioned Espen Gargak is mentioned in Bundahis 19, verse 135, thus: Thou shouldst propitiate the fire Vasista, the smiter of the demon Spenga Gra. It is also written Spen Gargak in chapter 17, verse 1, and Espen Garoga in chapter 28:39. And the lightning, the fire Vasist, see chapter 17:1. And the groaning and the raging are tumult and flashing. Justa has howling and shrieking, the two words being very ambiguous in the original. And 23 small seeds, see chapter 13:6. And Sovbar, see chapter 22:1-3. And the north side, mentioned in verse 15, probably means the north side of the Arid Vivsur fountain of the sea, which is said to be on the lofty Hugar, a portion of Alburz, from the northern side of which these two semi-mythical rivers are said to flow. See chapter 12, verse 5, and 20, verse 1. Now, I know when I refer to Hajar, that the references of her being deeper into northeast Africa, but, Egypt. But some of this still could possibly stand as this here. In verse 17, the 18 navigable rivers, see chapter 20, verse 2, and flowing back to the Arag River, here written of Reng, but the usual Pahlavi reading is Arag, the nasal of the Avestan Ranga being generally omitted in Pahlavi. as other nasals are sometimes. Thus, we often find sog for song, stone. And verse 1, chapter 8, the word good need is a transposition of Gundid, a graphical variant of Gundid Shuk. And its root to the bottom, verse 3, M6 has Rakak, but this and many other strange words are probably due to the copyist of that manuscript having an original before him, nearly legible in many places. In Numbers, verse 5, are as it were innumerable. The word Amar, meaning both number and innumerable. And out of earth in 18 years, see chapter 12, verse 1. And the perfection of men's advantage. The word must be Farhakt Tagan properties. Farhakt Tagan. Both here and in chapter 9, verse 6, as Farhaktissen is an ungrammatical form. And with chapter 9, verse 1, that when reading Amat, when, instead of moon, which, see the note to chapter 1:7, and 10,000, verse 4, see chapter 27, verse 2, and 100,000 species, plants. Here, 120,000 are mentioned, but see chapter 27:2 and selections of Zadsparam 8:2. Well, which one of them is the right one? I mean, there's a lot of contradictions and stuff in the Bible. People don't, tend not to rewrite the Bible to fix them. In fact, I can't think of any example where somebody went through to do that. Are of all seeds, all germs, verse 5. The white home tree, the Gokard tree, see chapters 18, verse 1-6, and 27, verse 4. And it passed away, the primeval ox, chapter 10, verse 1. See chapter 4, verse 1. And see chapter 14, verse 1, and 27, verse 2, in regards to the 50 and 5 species of grain. The moon station, see chapter 14:3, in the Mahyast 0 and 7. Blessings are invoked for the moon of ox lineage, Gaok Ithra, in conjunction with the soul-created ox and the ox of any species, and the Avesta. The gender of these two primeval oxen appears doubtful, owing probably to the dual genitive masculine of their epithets being of the same form as the singular genitive feminine. And 282 species of each kind, verse 3 there, that is of each sex. See chapter 14, verse 13 and 27. In all three occurrences of this number, K20 has 272, but all other manuscripts have 282, except M6 in this place only. K20b has 32 kinds instead of 33 kinds of land. It kind of amounts to the same if it's symbolically relating to, the teeth and the head, or the spine and the skull. And this portion, verse 2 of 11, that is Kavaniras, or maybe one portion as Hana. This is often used for one, because the Pazand form of both words is eh. And we have in Cash possibly an attempt to connect the term Keshvar with cash. But the sentence may also be translated thus, and they formed various districts, like this portion on the east side is the Sava region, and so on. And could that be related to the exclamatory Savaha in the Sanskrit stuff? In the Pahlavi Vend 1 for A, and in the Ma'inyo Ikard 9:6, it is added, except with the permission of the angels or the demons. It's not possible to go from one region to a region. Okay. And in verse 5, the superiority, sorry. So in M6, but K20 has Zadari, which would imply for the destruction of what he saw of it. And Soshans is born in Kavaniras, verse 6, always spelt so in the Bundahis manuscript K20 and M6, and corrupted into Socios in Pazand, but it is more usually written Soshans in other Pahlavi works, and its Avesta form is Saoshyas. See chapter 32, 8. And then we go on in chapter 12 to talk about the stations of the Zoroastrian heaven in 4. You know, we have the star station, the moon station, the sun station, and then the endless light. And Hugar the lofty, verse 2. In all the geographical details mentioned in the Bundahis, there is a strange mixture of mythical tradition with actual fact. Well, myth and fact are, in a way, meant to be the same. You know, so, the author of the work finds names mentioned in the Avesta by old writers of another country and endeavors to identify them with places known to himself, much in the same way as attempts have been made to identify the geographical details of the Garden of Eden and other parts of the Bible. Most of the names of these mountains occur in the Zamyad Yast or in other parts of the Avesta, as will be noticed in detail further on. The number 2244 is also mentioned in verse 7 of that Yast. A very able commentary on this chapter will be found in Winchman's Zoroastric Studien, page 1-19. The Avestan Sikadava of Zamyad Yast 5 is Mount Sikidav. And Kangdez, see chapter 29, 4 and 10. The name here is written Kandez in R20. In M6, the word is Kof, mountain, which is almost identical in form. If this be the correct reading, the translation will be a mountain among those, and the mountain which they say is agreeable, and the delight, and so on. The mountain is, however, probably intended for the Avestan Antara Kanga, within Kanga of Zamyad Yast 4. And Alburz is mentioned in verse 3 of 12. The Hara-ite Bares of Zamyad Yast 1, but it is probably usually called the Hara Bereza-ite, see chapter 5:3, and a central peak of the mythic Alburz, around which the heavenly bodies are said to revolve, chapter 5:3, the Tarak. The Tarak, Tarak in Arabic is related, right? Is the Avestan Ta'era mentioned in Yasna 41, verse 24, Ramyast, verse 7, Zamyad, VT, what does VT stand for? 6. And the sun passed in. similar concept to the sun door, right? So an M6, but K20 has go in. Page 82. Sorry about the shifting. I'm not getting comfortable today. Hugar the Lofty. This appears to be another peak of the mythic Alborz, probably in the west, as is connected with Sut of S, the western chieftain of the constellations, C24, 17, 27. It is the Avestan Huka Irya, the Rezo of Yasna 44, verse 14, Abanyas 3, 25, 96, Gos Yast 8, Meher Yast 88, Rashnu Yast 24, Favardin Yast 6, Ram Yast 15, and Arad Vidsur, see chapter 13, 3 to 5, and Sindom Mountain in Harmazd Yast 31, and Zamyad Yast 2 and 66, and Ushadhano Mountain is mentioned as having many mountain waters around it, but this seems to be a near neighbor of the Usha Dharana Mountain. See verse 15. The details of the text correspond with the description of the Hindva Mountain given in Tistar Yas 32. Thus, Us Hindvad Paite Garoid Yo Histaite Ma'idim Zriyango V'uru Kashahe. Up on the Hindva Mountain, which stands amid the wide-shored ocean, and the Pahlavi name Usindom has probably arisen from the Us Hindvad of this passage as suggested by Justi. See chapter 13:5, 18:10 and 11. The sky is considered to be a true firmament, our hard and indestructible dome. Of course, we can think of that symbolically, right? The Kinvar Bridge, mentioned in verse 7. The Kinvato Paretu of the Avesta, mentioned even in the Gathas. In the Pahlavi Vend, 1901, it is stated that they pass across by the Kinvad Bridge. Those two extremities are their own heavenly angels. One stands at the Kakad-e-da-itik and one at the Alberg. The former mountain seems not to be mentioned in the Avesta, but the bridge is the path of the soul to the other world. If righteous, the soul passes by it easily over Alberz, the confines of this world, into paradise. But if wicked, it drops off the bridge into hell. And the Arzur Ridge, see Vendadad 3:23, 1940. The words in brackets may perhaps be inserted by mistake, but they occur in all manuscripts examined, and there is nothing inconsistent with tradition in supposing Arzur to be the extreme north range of the mythical Alberz, which surrounds the earth, being the place where the demons chiefly congregate. And of the Alborz mountain is what's in the parentheses. Now, in taking it back to the note before that, in the Islamic tradition, one of the things that a person comes across is that on the day of judgment, when people are judged, that we cross over this bridge. And this bridge, depending on our consciousness and our deeds, it widens and constricts and, even to the point of, being like a razor that cuts you in sunder and sends you down to the pit of hell. And and of course the speed in which one goes across it, right? And it might be a pleasant experience, like the tongue going through warm milk, right? A parsen, for the best of us. Justa adopts the reading Harpa Rasen, which occurs in K 24 times out of 11, but is corrected thrice when Deichmann suggests that this mountain is the Avestan Skiata, or Iskata, Upaere Saena of Yas 10, verse 29, and Zamyad Yas 3, which the Pahlavi translator of the Yasna explains as the Parsen Craig. It seems to be a general name for the principal mountain ranges in the south and east of Iran, as may be seen on comparing this passage in chapters 24, 28 with chapter 20, 16, 17, 21, 22, where the Haro, Hetumand, Marv, and Balk rivers are said to spring from Mount Aparsen, but its application to the southern range is probably due to the etymological attempt in the text to connect it with Pars. The selections of Zadsparam 7 and 7 have Hinistan for Kyrgyzstan, and Sagastan can also be read Sistan. Mount Manus. At verse 2, it is also called Zarid, but in Zamyad Yast, Zarado and Arado Manusha are mentioned as neighboring mountains. The word great is omitted in M6, and that is around the ranges of Alborz, Aparsen, and Manus. Oh, the three mountains. And Mount Iraq, that is around the ranges of Alborz, Aparsen, and Manus. Oh, I mean, perhaps intended for the Erez Isho of Zamyad Yas 2, the description would apply to any of the mountains near Nisapur. And Mount Kino, the name is omitted in the manuscript, but is taken from verse 2 as suggested by Juste. Perhaps it may be connected with the country of Seni, chapter 15, 29, which is explained as being Kinistan, probably the land of Samarkand, which place was formerly called Keen, according to a passage in some manuscripts of Tabari's Chronicle, quoted in Alcey's Oriental Geography. Now we'd say that's in Russia now, wouldn't we? Or, one of those former USSR countries. So, Mount Kaf, not Kaf, nor is it mentioned in the Pahlavi Vend 557, as supposed by Juste. The Kaf Kope Arayad, the Spiegel's edition of the Pahlavi text, being a misprint for Kafako Parayad, it traverses a fissure. See Hogg's essay, 2nd edition, page 326, note 2, similar to the Mount Kaf of Sufism, right? Well, not really. Mount Aush Dastar, the Avestan Usha Darena of Yasna 1, 41, 2, 54, 3, 65, 4, 45, 22, 31, 25, 22, Harmazd Yast 31, Zamyad Yast 0, 2, and 97, and Mount Arizur, called Arizurbum in verse 2, which name stands for the 6th and 7th mountains, Arizuro and Bumyo in Zamyad Yas 2. The land of Arum was the eastern empire of the Romans. and the Padash Kvargar mountain, evidently the mountain range south of the Caspian, now called Alborz, but whether this actual Alborz is to be considered a part of the mythic Alborz is not very clear. The Avestan Ra'e-Va'us, shining of Zamyadyas 6, it's also called the Ridge of Vistasp, Rivand mountain. And then we have Khurasan, or the east, on which the Burzine fire, see chapter 17, verse 8. The Vadgas mountain, the Avestan Va'ete Ga'eso, the 12th mountain in Zamyadyast, verse 2. Badgres in Persian, and Bakir. In verse 2, it is Bakir, which Justa thinks is another name for Mount Darspet, white poplar. The latter name, not being repeated here, makes this supposition probable. And K20, the Days of Yim, has Rum, and manuscript 6 has Lanman, but and 6 is, but both explained by the Pazan gloss Gim, which is also the reading of the Pazan manuscript. If the gloss be rejected, the most probable translation would be, and in our days, Shatro Ram, or Ramissen, the victorious, erected on it a myriad towns and cities. And Mount Kebed Sikaft Windishtman suggests that this may be intended for the Avestan Skiata, or Iskata, mentioned in the note on Aparsen in verse 9. The Avestan Siamaka and Vafra'u of Zamyadyast 5 is here as Vafar Homand, having snow, and probably the Siako and Safedko of Afghanistan. With regard to Kino, see the note on verse 13. The former mountain is called Siak Mu'iman, having black hair, in verse 2, which is certainly more grammatical in form than Siak Homand. And the Spendiad mountain, the Avestan Spento Data Azamyad Yast, verse 6, and the Circuit Var of Rivand. The term Var often means lake, but we are not informed of any lake Rivand through a mountain of that name, though a mountain of that name is described in verse 18. So it seems advisable to take Var here in its wider sense of enclosure, circuit, or district. Or it could have had that back in the day. You know, like the Nile and had extra branches, and all sorts of places had extra things back in the day. And I'd like to see the geology work that says whether or not a lake was there. Because some of these mountain passes and stuff were carved by glaciers, which ended up being lakes and eventually maybe evaporated when the climate wasn't suitable to maintain it. The Avestan Karva Aspa Zamyad Yast, verse 6, is Kondrasp mountain, and Iranbeg, see chapter 22, verse 3. All manuscripts have Sobar here. If the circumflex be used in Pahlavi to indicate not only the consonant D, but also the vowel E and E when it follows a vowel, seems probable. This name can be read Ku-Iras, or in any case, it is evidently intended for the Vestin Ka Orissa in Zamyad Yast 6. It is written Kondros in verse 2 and Kondros, nothing, okay.